What's going on, Reef Builders? I'm Jake Adams. I got my fellow reef therapist, Mark Vanderwall, in the house. How you doing, Mark?
Doing good, man. Had a good day. Ready for
Ver-
another deep discussion.
Yeah, I just want to let everybody know we've been really hitting the pavement as far as this reef therapy format is concerned. We put together a really nice logo for reef therapy. I'm very happy with it. I'm sure we'll come up with some merch down the road. But more importantly, Um, this is the format that really lends itself well to just listening because we're not showing anything other than our face on YouTube. So I think we're already on Spotify, and we just got approved by Apple, so we'll be in the Apple Music or whatever they're calling it this decade. And I'm sure everything else is shortly behind it. So if you're not subscribed to YouTube, go ahead and hit the link there. And but if you want to hear us I guess without seeing our pretty visages, go ahead and check out your favorite podcatcher. If we're not there yet, we'll be there very soon. And so we really kind of kicked off the whole reef therapy sessions, probably with a strong focus on hardware and equipment, because that's something that Mark and I have always discussed a lot. So we thought we'd take a nice hard left turn into animal land and livestock. And my wife works at an aquarium store, and she tells me all the time that people will look at certain corals and at certain frags and ask what its name is. Not what the coral actually is, but if it doesn't have some fancy made up trade name, they're immediately deflated. Immediately deflated. I'm like, if you like the coral, if you like the color, if you have some confidence that you can keep that animal alive, then just go for it. It doesn't matter what it's called because it's not even real.
Well, if you asked about the coral, you clearly liked it, right? I mean, at that point, who cares?
So this entire episode is going to be devoted to underrated livestock, fish, inverts, and I figured we'd end with corals because that's going to be a nice long rabbit hole. And did you have some ideas? I know I kind of put this in your ear just a couple days ago. What's your overall thought on overrated and underrated livestock?
Oh, I think people put a lot of hype on if something is rare or hard to get, and I don't know. I think if you're excited about the reason that it's rare in the sense that it comes from a interesting geographic location, right? Then yeah, by all means, that's great, right? But if you're just, you see some of the hype build up around the rarity of, I mean, if we're going to stick to fish and invertebrates first, I do think that sometimes the how do I put it? The focus ends up being on the rarity of the thing that like that's why you think it's cool versus it's an interesting organism to have in your tank, or it's pretty. The example I always wanted to use, but it's not really good for the times anymore, was the yellow tang versus gem tang comparison.
Mm-hmm.
I always felt like the yellow tang was one of the most underappreciated fish. Not in the sense of, I mean, it's like everybody had a yellow tang. It was like the clownfish of tangs, right? Like everybody had one, so it's not like it was ignored. But I didn't ever feel like people appreciated it. Like they just saw it like it was a $20 fish.
It's not. It's not just the color for me.
Yeah.
It's also the uniformity, the vibrance, the saturation of the color. But that alone isn't enough. There are some bright yellow fish. For me, it's that perfect spade shape of yellow tangs. I'm really glad this is where we're starting out because I just picked up a 15-year-old 10-inch black tang. He's been in captivity for 15 years, and he's almost jet black. And he went from a 4 by 8 foot long kind of coral holding tank to a 4 foot tank that's 18 inches wide. And you could just tell this guy's been he's been in aquariums longer than most people have kept aquariums. Just the behavior from when he dropped it in the tank. But I love all the zebrasomas, and to be honest, like the black is probably my least favorite when they get larger, because they get kind of like a funky elongated shape and they get like a weird silver streak. But this guy doesn't have that problem. But yeah, yellow tangs, Scopus, I think purples especially. I don't know why I'm the only person I think that has discussed and really observed the different spots and stripes of purple tangs. If you see enough of them, you realize like there's some diversity there that you can see up close.
Yeah, and just, I mean, I'm. This is obviously a personal preference thing, but a healthy, like a thriving, healthy, well-fed yellow tang to me is always a sight to behold. I always think that's just an amazing fish. Like if you're an outsider going into a fish store, or going to somebody's house and they've got a reef tank, that's one of those fish that everyone sees and notices, right? Of course, now they're more scarce, and they have the hype of the rarity behind them as well now. So
it's weird. It's like such a mixed blessing, because they are being captive bred, and I know that they've really been working to refine the quality of the yellow tangs that are exported. And we'll move off of yellow tangs here in a second, but I do want to get this out that when clownfish were first being bred, there was a lot of pushback because they weren't as colorful, they were smaller, they were more expensive, they were not as colorful. And I mean, it takes a long time to really perfect that out. And what's funny now is like nobody even wants most wild clownfish and all the diseases they might bring in. And to be honest, man, like some of the clownfish producers, they are brighter orange than the wild ones. Have you ever kind of noticed that to any degree?
Yeah. The only wild, I guess, perculas that I've always, I wish we could sometimes still find, and maybe they're out there, are the true.
I know you were going to say that.
Yeah, Solomon Island perks. Yeah.
So this kind of ties back into the zebrasomas too. When I was younger, obviously I had like some saddlebacks, and I had some Ocellaris clownfish, and back then the clownfish was a true percula clownfish,
Yep.
And same thing. So like one of my first like favorite books was the Daniel Knopp giant clam book, and there was gem tangs all up in there because Europe had a lot easier access to the Western Indian Ocean. And I was like, oh my God, that's a dream fish. And maybe about 2 years ago, I didn't get one gem tang. I got 4 at the same time. But now I have over 20 yellow tangs, because every time I see a used one at a fish store before Hawaii shut down, I just had to have them. And so now pretty much the only thing missing from my stables, I think, is I have a solid yellow Scopus tang. I need to go ahead and get both sail fins, because why not? And captive bred yellow tangs. I'm probably going to get some captive bred yellow tangs here soon, and I'm looking forward to seeing the progress that they've made through the captive breeding. But continue on with the point that you were making between the yellows and the gems.
No, I just so I mean I went down the same level of appreciation with gem tangs back in the day. I remember going on a scuba trip in South Africa, Mozambique, and seeing one, and I wasn't expecting to see it there because everything I read was they weren't there. They were what is it? Mauritius, yeah. So I don't know if this guy was just like a stray, but so I have some sentimentality with gem tangs from those type of experiences, but I personally speaking, if they were the same value, I would put my money on a yellow tang any day.
Oh yeah, just not even close. Just because I take this challenge at both ends. I really love the super common stuff. There's a reason that like some of these iconic fish, like clownfish and surgeonfish, certain gobies and wrasses are super popular. But on the flip side, I also love the super exotic stuff, but not usually related to price. Kind of going back to what you started saying about geography. When a fish comes from a certain place and you can look at it and think about, oh, this cocoa peel angelfish was from this Christmas Island, Indian Ocean, or gem tangs, or from the Mauritius, or a certain fish from the Red Sea. That's another layer of appreciation that I think takes a long time to develop.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I just think that, when people do post their gem tangs and everything, I don't think their motive is maybe in that place, right? Like, I think their excitement is just because of the price tag that it was.
It's so funny how a gem tang just 5 years ago was probably like $2,500.
Yeah, they've gone
'cause
down in price.
well, they were coming in piecemeal from Mauritius, like
Yeah.
just a few here and there. But I don't think they occur in Mauritius because I've been diving in Mauritius, and I was there, I don't know, 4 or 5 days. We saw two tiny babies. But I have been diving in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, and what I wanted to see when I was out there was tiger angelfish, and I saw two in the wild and then one in an aquarium. But on one of my dives, bro, I'll never forget this. I plopped in the water, and as soon as like the bubbles just kind of floated off of my mask, all I saw were gem tangs the size of dinner plates. Just first of all, it was 65 degrees, so it was like almost cold water. It was super surgy. There was no other fish. There was no other surgeonfish.
Was that Aliwal Shoal, or was that
Yeah, it was Aliwal
up
Shoal,
in
yeah.
Sadwana? Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy.
That is a
Um,
crazy dive for us folks used to Caribbean-style cattle boat
Mhm.
diving. Like, I felt like
Sup-
I was a Navy SEAL.
Oh yeah. The boats like kind of breaching the huge waves.
Yeah.
What do they call those inflatables? I guess maybe just inflatables.
Yeah, dinghies
And
or
I remember
whatever.
resting on the bottom and watching my depth gauge vary by 15 feet because the swells were so huge
Yeah.
where we were diving. It wasn't a lot of current, but it was a lot of swell. But yeah, the surgeonfish, while we're talking about the surgeonfish, when they're brought into captivity, they're really small. And it's hard to, especially all the different esoteric Acanthurus species, Fowleri, Maculaceps, Berrine. It's not until they're like a good foot to
Yeah.
foot and a half that you really start to see and appreciate their full adult coloration.
Yeah, I've never gone down that road just because I felt a tank big enough to accommodate fish like that.
I'm there with you.
But yeah, that's like a bucket list group of fish right there. I'd say the same for any nasos, right? It's I've never had a tank large enough that I would feel comfortable keeping one, I guess, long term.
I've only had a Vlumingi because I got him when he was like 2 inches at a time when they were like $500 and they were only being imported from Palau. I was selling them for $500 and 99 at Marine Fish in
Yeah.
Marietta, Georgia. But I was able to find a small one just kind of mixed in with some other batches. Now you can get them all day long, but that's the only one I've ever kept. Oh my God, they're so freaking friendly.
They're like dogs, man. They're like pets.
But some other surgeonfish that I really love. I have one in almost every single tank. It was Tomini, good Tomini tangs and convict tangs.
That's on my list, man. I got a little list right here, and I wrote
nice.
down convict tank. I've got my second one now, and I don't understand why you don't see those in tanks more, because they're
literally the
tang.
cheapest fish. They're the cheapest surgeonfish on our price list. Cheaper than Tomini, cheaper than the Scopus. Yeah, it's convict tang.
Well, and what I like about them, and somebody out there is going to completely disagree with me about this, but in my experience, they're not very territorial, and they just graze all day long. Like, they're too busy to pick a fight because they're just grazing your tank all day long.
I my go-to algae cleanup crew for everything, for every tank. I mean, I've got 5, 6 tanks here that each have at least one yellow tang or zebra summa of some kind, one Tomini and one convict. I like having those 3 different mouths, right? The Cantharus is kind of a generalist. The bristlemouth tangs have a bristle mouth, like the Tomini, and then your zebra summa's got that little pincher nose, like they really can get in between stuff. But yeah, it goes back to when they're small and when they're at the fish store, they're just a little washed out. And I can tell you, after having mine for a couple of years, I mean, they're just bold, just really bold colored.
Yeah. Yeah, so swap out the Tomini for a yellow eye coal. That's what I've got going on. And again, I guess those are now.
Unobtainium.
Yeah. But that was always just a great fish where, it was affordable, and a healthy one is gorgeous. I mean, just people, I think, underappreciate that fish.
It's funny because objectively, when you're looking at a Tomini and a yellow eye coal tang, especially a good picture of one, the coal tang is, in my mind, objectively way more attractive than the Tomini, but they do nothing for me.
No?
They don't do anything for it. They don't move me inside. I have like 5 or 6, no, 7. I think it's 7 different Tominis throughout the tanks. And I don't know, maybe it's, there's definitely maybe like that sentimentality factor, where, I don't know, the white tail and orange margins of the Tomini tang, it's just, that's my jam.
Well, and I recognize this argument is a bit lost against the Tomini, but a yellow eye coal, obviously the yellow eyes, I like that personally, but the dorsal fin will get very light orangey, at least the ones I've kept, when they get big, when they start to become more adult. And it's just a cool, subtle, like flame type of dorsal fin that, I don't know, you don't ever see that depicted in the pictures of them, but it's always something cool that I appreciate in person.
So yeah, I mean, I would say that all the tangs that you've never heard of, if you see them in a store, they're probably going to develop into much nicer adult fish. Obviously you kind of want to discourage most people from messing around with nasotangs and a lot of different acantharus, like the general surgeonfish, because they're just going to get so big. I mean, I'm sure everybody here has seen 8-10 inch nasotangs in 125s. Doesn't make it right.
Yeah.
But that's a personal preference. I'm not going to throw shade on anybody who is doing that.
I'm not. I don't want to be part of the tank police, as they call it, but I don't think a tank looks good when the fish are oversized, right? It's like the Oscar in the 20-gallon tank kind of thing. Like, you're not selling me on a cool glass box of a reef when there's this giant fish just pacing around in it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I recognize that yellow tangs and some of these ones we've even talked about turn into dinner plates in the wild, but I just, in my experience, they either it takes them a very long time to get there, or you can I'm not gonna say they grow to the size of the tank, that's not true, but they seem to hang in there in a size range that doesn't make you feel like they're out of place.
Yeah, so the black tang is 15 years old, right? He's 10 inches. So you're talking, for most zebra summas, maybe, just let's generalize, like half an inch a year, a little more when they're younger, a little bit less when they're older. All right, so I think we talked about surgeonfish enough. What are some other fish that you think are like totally underrated?
Let me see here. What did I write down? Oh, this one's easy. You might think it's a cop out, but I truly believe that fish is underappreciated. The flame hawk, the hawkfish.
I think they are appreciated, though.
I don't know. I
see them in a lot of tanks.
See, I don't. That's the fun.
I
see them for sale a lot,
get
maybe
get some love. Yeah.
Yeah. I just a lot of times it's like you have to pick between a fish with a great personality and a fish that's pretty or like has a lot of color.
Yeah.
And they're one of those odd ones where you get both, right? You get it's a beautiful color. It's not a lot of truly red fish to choose from in a
That
sense.
won't pick your corals.
True, yeah.
Red flame angel will pick on stuff. Tomato clownfish and some of those red clownfish will just be straight, but bullies.
Well, and they're all like shades of red, right? Like I have a flame angel, but it's more orange than red.
Okay,
And
yeah,
you know what I mean?
no,
Like
you're
a flame
totally
hawk is
right.
red, right? And they're just hilarious to watch. You know, I mean, they're
It's really fun when you have some large corals and they perch up high and they just dive bomb stuff. Like they really
yeah,
copy the behaviors of an actual hawk in the way they just dive bomb stuff.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, maybe you're right. Maybe not underappreciated, but it's and I get they're a bit of a risk with shrimp and all that fun stuff, but to me they're worth it. Like they're one of those fish that I want in every tank I have.
Okay, well, one hawkfish that I think doesn't get enough love is the Caribbean orange spotted hawk.
Ooh.
It's one of those things. Again, they're the cheapest. They have to be the cheapest. They're nano hawkfish. Their mouth is so small they could never even bother like a peppermint shrimp. And they have just these bright orange speckling on their face, and they're very different from all the others. That's always been my go-to hawkfish. But speaking of on the redfish, man, one of my top tens that's really easy to throw out there is firefish.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Firefish. I love me some firefish. The only thing I would say about the firefish is I try to do some groups of them. I put 6 in a 40-gallon, 6 in my 5-foot Red Sea reefer, ended up with 2 in each one. They literally selected themselves into a pair. And when I've been diving, I've seen maybe up to 4, but it's usually 2 or 3 in a burrow. So it's like you'd think that would be kind of a gregarious fish, but no, absolutely not. Like unless you have a really big tank and they can set up different territories, but regular firefish, purple firefish, and then if you're really paying attention, the bigger, slightly yellower purple firefish were described as a new species last decade, Nemateleotris exquisita, and this is kind of gets into the semantics a little bit, but I picked up a pair of those recently, and I still remember, man, when you and I were just like, when Helfrich's firefish were unheard of. And then I think it was sea dwelling creatures that really kind of worked their way into like the Christmas Island, Central Pacific. And you got one. Do you remember that?
I got a pair.
You got a pair.
And
oh
I was a
God.
little skeptical of like, are they really a pair? You know, because it was
Right.
it was pricey to get 2, but
How much was it back then? Do you remember?
they were 130 each, I think.
And
if I
that was a
recall.
deal, right?
Yeah.
There
Yeah,
was
and
definitely a
that
point
you
where they
know,
were
account
like-
for inflation, right? That was a while back. So, and it was funny because I was really skeptical that they were a pair. I'm like, I'm gonna watch one kill the other one off, and that's gonna be an expensive experience. But then my wife was with me. She was like, you can't separate them. I was like,
I remember that story
okay.
about Nicole. Yeah, that's really cool.
yeah,
But yeah, dude, $15 to $20 firefish is just so freaking beautiful. So much color, and they're out, and they don't mess with anything, and they're super hardy. And I wouldn't say that they're totally underrated, but they should be celebrated. Like just so much more. And then right along with them, all the other dartfish, right? Scissortail goby and a zebra goby. Oh my lord! Again, just like everything else, when they're small and just a little juvenile, they look cool. But when they get large and really settled in, they just glow.
Yeah.
Absolutely glow.
I'll throw another one your way. It's not actually I wouldn't call it a cheap fish. I guess cheap relative to its more well-known counterpart, but the Swalacey basslet.
Bro, I have it down here. I have it on my list. I'm sure it's blown out, but like, listen, I have a candy basslet,
Yeah.
and I have a Swiss guard, and I've had Swalaceys before. This is something I'm going to say about freaking every fish. It's muted at the fish store, and then you get it home, and you get it conditioned, the all the orange just starts glowing. It
Yeah.
really comes out. So why do you have Swalezi down? That's so funny. I didn't write down that many fish, but my Swalezi is literally on here.
Well, I mean, the the candy basslet is out of my price range, right?
Mhm.
So it's not like I bought the Swalezi as a poor man's. So the first one I ever got was, I believe it was Macna in Atlanta, and Kevin Cohen Live Aquaria was there, and they didn't want to bring all their fish that they had on display back to Macna.
Mhm.
So me being a local resident, he was like, "Hey, do you want a couple of these fish?" And he was really generous, and he gave me a Swalezi basslet and a yellow Tonga. Why am I drawing a blank right now?
Blenny?
Blenny, thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
And like you said, the Swalezi was all right looking, but once he got settled in my tank, the orange on that thing was crazy. And then, again, I get a kick out of having cryptic fish that maybe you don't see them every day, but when you're chilling in front of your reef with a beer and that one time a week the dude pops out and looks at you and goes back in his hole, you're like, oh, hey, that's fun, right? The fish that are in your face begging for food all the time, nothing wrong with that, but it's cool to have some little surprises coming out of your rock work. Mandarins are a lot like that too, where sometimes, at least in my experience, like mandarins I won't see them every day, but they're around,
Mhm.
But
You must have a lot of rock.
I wouldn't say so. I mean, I definitely don't have the rock wall ever, but yeah, it's just that was a cool fish where you not only was it cryptic and cool in that regard, very durable. I mean, the thing was indestructible, and then it had a ton of color. I mean, like it's a win-win. So
You know what? I think my philosophy for fish and corals, but really the fish is there was a quote by Takashi Yamano in one of his first books, and I'm butchering it, but he was saying that something to the effect of any fish in the peak of health is perfect.
yeah,
And I really feel that way about so many fish. There's certain species like that's just never going to do it for me, but on the flip side, just about any of these fish, you get it conditioned, you get it, fed properly, make sure it's not getting bullied, and there's something about all animals, all living things, where it glows. Even like humans, when they're in their early 20s, males and females are just glowing. There's just kind of that fitness that you can see, and then you and I are kind of past our prime, so that's why we're putting this in the podcast.
why are you depressing me? No, I'm just kidding.
But yeah, so I really feel that way about a lot of fish. I'm also a big fan of damselfish.
Oh yeah,
I know they get really demonized, but I mess mostly with the Chrysiptera
yep.
and the Pomacentris, and I tried to add them last, but man, I don't know why people don't lose their mind when they see a metallic blue damselfish with yellow fins or yellow trim, either whether it's a stark eye or an azure or Tasmanian. Those things are so awesome, man. They really get a bad rap.
Yeah, I mean, I've always liked the Starkey. That was always I referred to as my poor man's resplendent angel. But I mean, even in my current tank, I have an azure damsel. I had 3, but I lost 2, and I still don't know why. But the other one's just holding out, and it's kind of fun because he's darting in and out of the corals, very similar to like what I would see in a documentary or something. And like you said, how cheap is that fish versus how colorful it is, right? And it's easy to keep.
Yeah, totally. I recently got a group of 8 small Springer's damselfish. And then I put them in my soft coral tank, which is now really mixed. And they're just like in and out of the branches. And they're still really small, So they still have a lot of that blue, but they're in and out of the Milka stylo. They're in and out of the Kenya tree. They're in and out of, I got an orange branching Samacora. And they're so freaking cool, man. And I mean, it was like $50 for 8 of them.
Yeah. I've been tempted to, I've never kept them, to be honest, the Talbot damsels.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
wonder, how they look when they're healthy, and I can't find any good examples of anybody that's kept them, I guess, long term and posted pictures about it. But I always thought those were pretty cool.
Talbots are pretty cool. Um, but really underrated, and I know this is one of Sanjay's favorite fish, is the Roland
Oh
damselfish.
yeah,
But unfortunately, there's two forms, and one of them doesn't have that really white, light-colored head that just gives them that funky pop. And it's like, all right, they're a little feisty, but they don't move far outside of a small territory. They don't have the tools to do a lot of damage. So, the Roland Eye damselfish is one. Last time I ordered some, they sent me the wrong kind with, they were just mostly gray. I'm like, what the hell, man? Get this out of my face. I ended up giving those away. But yeah, the Roland Eye damselfish. All right, sorry, the Talbots. That's what you were saying.
yeah,
Um, that's another one. It's gonna look okay at the store. You get it, locked into your tank. It'll just glow.
yeah.
It'll just be nice pinky yellow with some blue markings. Very awesome fish.
I'm trying to see what else.
Another group, man, that really has fallen out, I think, is the dottybacks.
Oh yeah,
When we were coming up, man, it was all about Red Sea, sunrise, orchid dottyback, and especially the sailfin. And they're captive bred, but they're just mass producing them. Instead of like perfecting the quality, they're just increasing the quantity. And man, I don't think anybody listening, almost no one listening, has seen like a perfect Mananictus splendens, the sailfin dottyback. Oh my lord. When you're diving, man, those things are freaking everywhere.
yeah.
Just totally everywhere. Have you kept any dottybacks in
I
your
have
career?
a orchid dotty back in my tank. That's an always a. Whenever I set up a tank, I've got like a staple list of fish that I
Mm.
just keep. Right.
Yep. Yeah. I'm right there with you.
Hawkfish. Yep. Orchid dotty back. It's purple. It's cool. It's not as cryptic, but it does bouncing around, out of the rocks. Gives you something a little different than your tangs that are in your face begging for food. I've always wanted to do a neon dotty back, but I keep getting
Mm.
mixed signals on those. Like some people actually they do all right in a big reef where they have enough space, and then other people report that they turn into absolute terrors. I don't know.
Obviously, the captive bred ones are a lot more docile.
Yeah,
Yeah, the neon, and the Arabian, and then the hybrid of the two. I've kept them all, and especially the Sankey eye dottyback. Right, they're not. They really are never gonna go after any fish that's not its shape. Unless you have like a strawberry pictochromis in a 10-gallon tank,
yeah.
you should totally be able to get away. And the captive bred ones are small, so they'll kind of grow into their pecking order.
I feel like a lot of the bad raps that sometimes some of these territorial smaller fish get are because they're viewed as nano fish, and you put them in
Mm,
a nano tank, and you know the
that's a
other
good
fish
point.
are always in their business, right? So I've always been kind of curious about that. Yeah, I don't know. That's another fish I would love to keep. Is it the elongatus or no ela?
Elongatus, yeah, you got it. You got it.
Yeah, those are cool, and they, from what I've heard, they're mild mannered.
Mm. What other fish can you get that is $10 and solid pink and bulletproof? Now I'm talking bicolor, diadema, or strawberry dottybacks. Um, it's funny talking about these. Like I have lots of surgeonfish. I got enough damselfish, but I don't have nearly enough dottybacks. But now that the fish populations are a little bit more fleshed out, it's like, oh, okay. Well, let me look out for these things. But the one that's always been super top of my list is the captive bred orchid dottybacks. They do a really good job, but there is some electric quality of the wild ones that it's
Hmm.
not reproduced in the captive bred ones. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, yeah, because I mean I remember the wild ones, and uh, a lot of the a lot of the captive bred ones. I feel like they almost come in a little ratty looking.
The
Um,
captive bred?
yeah, yeah, and one is I think they're small when they come in too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they're gonna sell them when they're as soon as they're at a sizable sale, they're
And they've
off to
been
the fish
duking it
stores.
out in a vat with 1,000
Yeah, yeah,
others.
exactly. um, so yeah, I mean they tend to grow up and still look good, but I would imagine sort of like again you brought up freshwater fish. There's definitely in a lot of the freshwater species you can tell the difference between a wild version and like one that's been captive bred many
Hmm.
generations.
Yeah.
So there's still that demand for a little bit of the wild stock, right?
Hmm.
That's I would say the dottyback kind of a good example of that difference. But is it worth it to go and collect a buttload of them in the wild? No. I mean, like a captive bred orchid dottyback's beautiful, you know.
Yeah, but for me, I guess I bonded with the appearance of a wild one. But in general, like I think you made a really excellent point of like when they're freshly captive bred, they've been duking it out. They're small, they're not mature, and I think what I'd like to get across with a lot of these fish is give them a chance.
Yeah.
Give them a chance. Um, any other fish that come to mind before we turn a
Mm.
page to a different broad group? I'm not a super huge wrasse guy. I'm always going to stick with like 6 line, 4 line, mystery wrasse, a couple odds and ends. So I'm not the guy to talk to about wrasses. And everyone loves angelfish, so I don't think they need any more airtime.
Yeah, I actually love wrasses, but I am not willing to put a lid or a
Mm.
canopy on my tank. So I've gotten away with, a mystery wrasse at one point in my life. And I may try one of those again with this new tank with the slightly larger rim, but, I'm not going to get into the fairy or flasher wrasses just because I'll always have an open top tank. And
I need to get into some flashers because I've never personally kept them. And wrasses are a fish I very much enjoyed seeing in other people's tanks. But man, even like the cheapest McCoskerai flasher wrasse, you see them actually flashing like their
oh,
namesake.
yeah.
Oh my lord. It's a sight to behold. And I've never personally kept them, so right now on this podcast I am committing to getting a small group of flasher wrasses. Let's see. I do have a pair of lineatus wrasses. No, sorry,
Oh,
not a pair. I
nice.
got two females, so that one could grow into a male, and I could just have them longer. I always loved me some flame wrasses, but again, these are not underrated fish. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody loves all kinds of flasher wrasses, but one that's actually maybe not celebrated enough is the majority of the exquisite fairy wrasses that are coming in mostly from Africa because they're really cheap and really common from there. Oh man, I got it for like $50, and it's just all the patterns and all the colors that you see in the pictures. And as he's gotten older and more mature, he's just he's really starting to turn on. I would say the exquisites, like the wrasses that used to be unavailable but now are ubiquitous. And
Yeah.
I feel like that is a trend for almost all of aquarium livestock, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like you were saying, yellows versus gems.
Yeah, it's if it's hard to get, then you want it more. But
I mean, we're talking about the creatures that have inherent value,
yeah,
not whatever is the it fish moment. Um, I would say, um, I'm trying to think if there's any other underrated fish.
I mean an easy one would be royal grammas, but
Oh God! Why do I not have that on my list?
yeah,
Sorry, I'm almost clipped us right now, dude. I'm just waiting for the right time for my quarantine system to just be vacated,
yeah,
and I'm gonna get 20 royal grammas. I mean, I would get a bunch of Dachongs too, but black caps also. But yeah, royal gramma. There's something about that fish. I guess they're probably like 15 or $20 now, but growing up they're like 8 to 10 to 12, and just I want them small. I want to grow them out. I mean, I super appreciate the one from the Cayman Islands that are never collected for the hobby. They're like a third purple and 2/3 yellow. You nailed it on the head with royal grammas. Mm-hmm.
yeah. That's I mean again maybe sort of like flame hawks. You do see them in a lot of tanks, but I definitely feel like people take that fish for granted. It's almost like a token fish they throw in versus like
Mm.
something that they're like, oh, I'm gonna build my nano tank around this, fish. Like,
Something you could say about, man, just about almost all fish species is like, if you give it the perfect conditions
hmm
so that it can be the boldest fish, whether it's a firefish or the swalezi or even a basic scopus tang, but especially a cheap royal grandma. Oh my lord, it is going to shine. But it's not going to in these days it's not going to shine as much in a blue heavy reef tank, is it?
yeah.
You need that daylight color to really bring out the yellow, to really bring out the magenta purple. I kind of wish we already had domesticated grandmas.
Well, and I like what you said about the lights because I feel that way about how coral selection has shifted too, right? Certain types of corals, especially like blue corals, you don't see as much demand for, I imagine, because of the way the lighting spectrum has gone. So,
Well, let's put a pin in the corals. I
sure,
think,
yeah,
I mean, I just want to say, I'm going to say this again and again regarding the fish and the corals. You get it in the peak of health, you're going to have a fun fish, right? So give an extra chance to some fish that you may not have heard of, or maybe some fish you see all the time and can't understand why they're popular. And I know we're going to have a long rabbit hole when we get to the corals. So maybe we can just touch on some invertebrates.
Ooh, I think one of the most underappreciated inverts would be the pincushion, or that whole kind of smaller set of sea urchins, whether they're tuxedos, whether they're
Tuxedo urchin, bro.
yeah,
That's number 2 on my list. So they're so fun. I mean, they graze. They do a complementary grazing job to what 3 different mouths of surgeonfish will do. They're actually beautiful, the blue ones, and it might be a little bit of annoyance when they pick stuff up and move it around, but actually it's mostly fun,
yeah,
right? Do you have any tuxedos right now?
yeah. And then I've just got your typical, Atlantic pincushion white urchin. And it's funny when they meet up because I have a picture of when the tuxedo and the pincushion like intercepted each other, and they're both
Mm-hmm.
wearing corals as hats, And I took a picture because I'm like, I wonder what those two are talking about. But you know, um, yeah, I mean, I saw some guy is 3D printing hats that you can
Oh
throw in the
my
tank,
goodness.
and like your urchin picks up a witch's hat or a top hat, and
I still have it, a tuxedo who wore a cap of green star polyps for over a year, bro. The green star polyps kind of grew under itself, and it was just so much fun because with the tuxedos and your picking cushions, you never know what they're going to pick up. Sometimes they're going to find little pieces of corals and stuff like you didn't even know you had, that broke off in the back. But it was really fun seeing the tuxedo urchin carrying around a green star polyp mat, but I had to take it off because the tuxedo urchin would, he'd cruise all over the tank, and there was this one spot where he was brushing up against, I don't remember exactly which coral, but he was stinging other corals by carrying this hat of green star polyp. But that's just so funny that you and I both had the swalezi and the tuxedo on our list. Yeah,
well, and
that's
it's a good example of this is sort of what I was hinting in one of our last conversations of. As soon as somebody hears a negative attribute about something, it's like they throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? So you talked
so
about
true.
damselfish, right? So then all
So
of a
true.
sudden, chrysiptera, which are this little, species of damsel that don't really deserve the reputation of like, the Dascalus or the Poma centra, whatever. They're their own thing, and they're cool as hell, and they're laid back, and you can keep them. Dottybacks got a bad rap, right? And then I remember everybody like 10 years ago were like, oh, don't put urchins in your tank because they'll grind away at all your coralline algae.
I wish.
I know, right?
I stopped. I hold back dosing iodine on because I felt like that was the limiting factor to coralline growth, and I really see coralline algae as a competitor with my corals. Like, okay, and there I have a different tank where they're not. I don't have fast growing corals, but yeah, now I wish I could find more urchins to actually grind down coralline.
Well, and the hitchhiker thing, right? It's really not the end of the world, right? Like, ah, they're moving my
No,
frags around, and
it's
same with
it's
like,
more fun.
yeah, Mexican turbo snails, right? Oh, don't keep them; they knock everything over because they're. I'm like, yeah, but they're great. I mean, they'll mow down things other snails won't, right? So,
As I said in a previous episode, like I'm not a snail guy.
yeah,
The only snails I have are of those that hitchhiked on colonies that I bought, or if they're small enough, on frags. I have probably not bought any non-decorative snails in 10 years. I do
yeah,
like nitrocuses though, but kind of the same vein. I just want to touch upon my stomatellas again. I'm gonna bring those up as often as I can, but like,
you're gonna start a trend, man. Somebody out there is
well,
captive
you can't
breeding
sell
them,
them, so that
and
you can't trend them,
yeah,
right? You can't come up with funky names for them. They don't have any crazy colors. They just exist. But dude, a tuxedo urchin is worth what, 20, 30, 50 hermit crabs?
yeah,
It's not even close. It's not even in the same league.
yeah.
But stomatellas are awesome. They don't get any airtime. Like, people will talk about their top 10 cleanup crews, and I'm like, that's the guy. That's the one. But you know what I do buy? Abalones.
Oh, really?
Yeah, dude, I have a big abalone in each of my coral flats. During the day, they'll kind of park somewhere and just kind of hang out. As soon as it starts getting dim, I mean, you can see them hitting the spots that are the heaviest. I don't have filamentous algae anymore. I
Yeah.
mean, but they really grind down that biofilm that consists of algae, bacteria, coralline. Yeah, I mean, and they're all cultured. I'm pretty sure you can't get wild abalones. If they eventually die, then you end up with a beautiful shell. But yeah, I've just always loved an abalone. It's just a stomatella that's 100 times bigger.
Bigger. Yeah. I've never kept one, to be honest.
Yeah,
That's,
they're so neat. They are so see underrated livestock. Like, you've never kept it. Well,
yeah,
it's because I'm usually ordering them from a wholesale list
yeah,
or special ordering them, and you primarily are encountering normal stuff at the local aquarium store, right?
right,
And
yeah,
you just haven't seen that one. Just ask for them. Since they're cultured, they're like super stable supply. Should be like $20, $25.
I'm gonna have to try that.
Yeah,
I've had the hitchhiker chitons, but I
Mm.
don't know what they do. They're just cool to see because it's like a little prehistoric animal chilling out in your reef tank.
Yeah, I have. You know what? I think the most underrated cleanup crew is everything that you pretty much can't buy.
Yeah,
Right? Stomatellas. I got little limpets everywhere. I got small chitons. And for those of you that don't know, a limpet is kind of like a cone-shelled snail, so that
I've
doesn't
got those.
spiral.
Yeah,
And then a chitin, it looks so bizarre. I've got it through all my tanks, but it's a small one. It's probably like a quarter inch, 6 millimeters or so, all different colors. But in the past, I've had some grow to like up to 2 inches, and you can't really buy those so much.
yeah,
Like, they just have to hitchhike along to end up in your aquarium. But yeah, chitins are pretty cool.
yeah. You
You,
stumped me on the inverts. I couldn't really think
it,
of.
we'll keep it a little bit shorter. But
All
you
right.
know what is the most underrated invertebrate of all? Bristleworms.
Oh yeah,
You don't have to love them.
but they've been demonized lately again, man. You go on the forums
Again?
and well, I guess there was a little period there where everybody with their deep sand beds were like, oh, don't add these starfish. They're going to eat all your bristleworms and destroy your sand bed. Where I think since deep sand beds aren't really a thing anymore, except for maybe some holdouts out there. I think people now are not digging the bristleworms anymore.
When I started the aquarium hobby, definitely it was like, oh my god, bristleworms! You got to get traps. You got to get an arrow crab to eat them.
Yeah.
You have to get an arrow crab to eat them, right? Like we get peppermint shrimp to eat Aptasia, and you had to get an arrow crab to eat your bristleworms. But now when people tell me or ask me about the bristleworms in their tank, I'm like, if you have bristleworms, it's because they're eating uneaten food. They're eating
Yeah.
leftover food. If you take those guys out, what do you end up with? Rotting food.
Well, and the people that post, and they have, I've seen some pictures online where they feed the tank and hundreds and hundreds of bristleworms come out, and it looks like something out of a horror movie.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's, demonizing the bristleworms, and I'm like, dude, how much food are you putting in that tank? Because their population will swell and wane based on your feeding habits, right? I mean, yeah,
Only based on your leftover food.
right.
So you have a free cleanup animal,
Yeah.
and you want to dog it?
It's
don't do
like
that.
it's like an elastic cleanup crew that scales up when you're feeding too much.
You can't buy bristleworms. You can't buy stomatellas. You can't buy limpets and little chitons. And you know what else you can't buy and is also demonized?
Hmm.
Asterinas.
Oh, I got a crap ton of those, man.
I have 4 different species. There's one with kind of red in the center. There's one with kind of bluish dots towards the center, and there's one that's kind of like the typical gray. And I'll be honest, I had this. I don't know what was going on. Entire tank totally fine. One nice slow burn Mondopora. They just somehow the coral was telling them come eat me. But they only graze the edges a little bit, and there's a part of me is like, I wonder if they're actually preventing this thing from receding all the way by eating the edge. But this is like 1 out of 1,000 corals. I do not spread asterinas on purpose, but I want everybody to be keenly aware that just like bristleworms, and they're obviously they're cooler than bristleworms. There are multiple different species. One of these days, I'm gonna do a video just going through the studio. I'm gonna go on safari, just find all the stuff we were talking about. But there's no commercial interest in sussing out the value of Asterina starfish if you can't sell them.
Well,
That's just the state of the hobby. It's kind of a bummer.
you're spot on about the, I think, misinterpretation too, because I think when you see the asterinas there, they're probably cleaning up something that's already going on, almost kind of like maggots on dead meat. I know that's a gross
Yep.
analogy, but a good example is, I hate, it's embarrassing to admit, but we talked about my dosing container being empty and me not realizing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
In one of the other podcasts, and my alkalinity dropped from like 8 to 4, right? I don't test my alk. I don't have a Trident. But when I noticed it was empty, I was like, I should probably test my alk so I know how much I should incrementally, slowly keep adding to kind of get back to where I'm at, right? Because if I just refilled it and the dosing pump continued at the level it was dosing, I had catch up, right? I had to catch up on my alkalinity a bit. So I needed to do that calculation. Well, with my alk at 4, the only acropora I have in my tank is a Jason Fox Flame acro, or whatever, the pink with the yellow
Fox
tips.
Flame.
Fox
Yeah.
Flame, there you go. It's the only acro I have in my tank. And it receded from the base a bit. As soon as my alk was where it needed to be, the recession stopped, right? But you see this like dead tissue, and the things I found chilling there were a limpet and asterina snails, right? And if I was a neophyte or maybe less experienced, I would have immediately jumped to the conclusion, hey, that invertebrate is eating my coral, right? But it wasn't.
Yep.
It's
Absolutely.
there's some dead mass there's some organic material, and they're just munching it up. They're doing me a favor.
I don't want to unequivocally say that asterinas are good for your tank or will never harm your corals, but man, it's also like the bristleworm thing too, right? Like if you just stop feeding like crazy, but you have all this coral, especially like shrooms and really juicy stuff, but all of a sudden you just kind of pull back on the feeding. Asterinas and bristleworms, I mean, they'll be a little bit more opportunistic, but man, I've celebrated Astorinas and paid close attention to them for decades, and there's been like 2 or 3 moments when they were, probably doing kind of the maggot thing, but if they're eating dead flesh before it can turn into a viral infection, they're probably helping out a lot. So yeah, I think
so I've got an
Astorinas get a bad rap.
insane population of Astorinas, right? In the morning, I'm sure you've got the same thing. In the morning, before the lights come on, they're all on your glass, right? So my question is always like, how can I have that many Astorina snails in my tank and be growing coral, right? Like, why are they just not eating all my coral up, right?
Right.
So
Right.
another one that I like is, and I don't know what species it is, but because we've always stumbled upon little micro brittle stars here and there, but there was a guy selling them by like the bags on a forum, and I'm like, how the hell is he?
How do you harvest those?
How do you?
I know I have them. I have a lot of them. But I could find one here. I could find one there. Mostly in like my Ketomorpha bowl is might be like the most go-to place I could look for those brittle stars.
So the ones I got from so I ordered some from this guy. I was like, all right, send me a bag, and I was curious, like, how the hell are you propagating or growing these things out, right? Those things, whatever subspecies or whatever he had, they're crazy all over my tank. And when I feed my tank, there's just little arms sticking out of all my corals and rocks. They're everywhere. If I pick up a coral, there's like 20 of them underneath. So now I kind of get it. Like if they were going like that buck crazy in his tank, I could easily like harvest them. And that got me thinking about when you and I were in Interzoo in Germany. There was a restaurant we went to. I think it was like a Chinese restaurant.
Tangs.
Huh? Yeah.
It's called Tangs.
And
with all the giant tangs. And
those tanks had these micro brittle stars with red stripes on them. They were like the little ones that. And I was like, man, I wish I could grab some of these and go home, because I've never seen a colorful version of like a micro brittle star that's in your like substrate, right? So if anybody out there has those, man, I want some.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to dog on the industry too much, but there's definitely a disconnect between some of these animals that are really great for your tank, stomatellas, limpets, chitons, astorinas, these little brittle stars, and their ability to be commercialized.
Yeah.
All right, so enough on that. A couple more inverts I want to point out that probably don't get enough love as porcelain crabs.
Oh yeah, those
just
are
porcelain
cool.
crab and anemone, man. That is
Heck yeah.
like the clownfish anemone symbiosis is not complete until you have a little porcelain crab. Just throwing up its little fan-shaped filter feeder claws. Oh my God, those are so cool. That being said, I don't have any. I've got a few anemones, but yeah, I don't have any porcelain crabs right now because I don't encounter them at the local fish store, and so I just have to go out of my way. But that used to be a lot more of a staple. And then I would say pretty much all ornamental shrimp. All ornamental shrimp. Coral banded shrimp, cleaner shrimp, blue coral banded shrimp, gold coral banded shrimp, Zanzibar shrimp, ghost shrimp. There's so many ornamental shrimp out there that they're only harvesting, fire shrimp, cleaner shrimp, and like a few coral bandeds. And obviously, the Aptasia eating peppermint shrimp.
That's a good point. You could really count on your fingers, like the ornamental shrimp that you see for sale, and that there's way more out there.
Yeah. I mean, all right. I know people want us to get to the corals. We had to touch on the inverts. I love the clams. I don't think I can make a case for people to love a hippopus clam. Because they're objectively just only pretty from like a top-down angle. But I've seen them, even diving it like, oh, okay. It just doesn't compare to everything else that's out there. All right. So now we get into the corals. And I firmly believe that every coral is underrated. Do you know what I mean by that?
I think I do. I think, so I have a thought on that, and it probably aligns exactly what you're thinking.
Go ahead.
So when you were posing this question, I was trying to think of, okay, what's an underappreciated coral? But the problem is the ultra crazy color Instagram picture popped under blue light crowd They're in every coral now, right? It used to be like it was all about the SPS, but they and now LPS softies. You know, you got $1,000 mushrooms. Um, I guess my argument there is that the non-limited edition ultra version of any of those coral species looks can be amazing. Again, sort of going back to what you said about fish, if you grow out any coral that's decent looking, right?
Preach, preach.
It's going to be amazing, right? A pale green favia, like grown to the size of a softball, right? It's going to look awesome, right? It doesn't need to be orangey, glowy with a limited edition name on top of it. So I know that's a bit of a generalization. I mean, I could give you some specific examples of underappreciated corals that I think have fallen to the wayside, maybe like from the past.
We'll get to those.
Yeah, but you get my point.
Yep. Yeah, just like I said with the fish, just about every single coral, when it's in the peak of health, is just a beautiful specimen, and it doesn't. I mean, sure, there's a crowd who's only going to be into the corals that burn their retinas with fluorescence and crazy colors, but something we're going to say over and over and over on Reef Therapy is that the frags, when they're small and they're just all you see is that leading edge, whether it's the encrusted part or the tips, of course it's going to make for an amazing picture. Dude, man, almost every single one of those corals as they grow out, it's really hard to dial it in perfectly. That's one. And two, even when they get larger, there's a lot of branch, not a lot of tips.
Yeah, that's true.
This is especially true of the tenuous. Walt Disney tenuous grown out is mostly yellow.
Yep.
It makes for an amazing frag. But, one coral on my list, that's kind of the top of my list of underrated corals, I think would have to be Christmas Favia.
Yep.
If you're listening or watching and you don't know what that is, it's just a nice neon green Favia with red mouths. You can pick this up anywhere, anytime, and it shouldn't be more than $20 or $30 for a good size frag or even a mini colony. And to be honest, like I have one, and I wasn't feeding my tank enough, and the green got muted, the red got muted, and then I got my nutrients back up, just a little bit of nitrate, a little bit of phosphate, and regular feeding, and now it's just colored from edge to edge. And that's a coral that looks amazing under daylight spectrum and blue light.
Yeah.
And it's not too aggressive either.
No, and again, it's an example of one that if you keep it for like 5 years, it'll grow into a really nice colony, and it'll look amazing. I have one that, same story, it got muted. It lost all its green. It's just red. But it was shaded by a huge leather coral that I have. And just recently I removed, it had like grown off of a rock, but when they get big enough, they are their own rock, right? So I took it out to my driveway and I chiseled it off the rock with a hammer. And then I put it out where there's more light, and now the green's coming back, and I'm like, man, I neglected that coral. I felt bad, but it hung in there, and now the colors are coming back, and you start to again appreciate, like, oh yeah, this is why I have this coral. It's an amazing coral. Yeah,
no, Christmas Favia is definitely top of my list, and I think there's probably we're talking about actual Favia, not misidentified Favia.
Yeah.
There's a lot of green Favias, red Favias, pink Favias, orange, especially from Western Australia, that it might be a little bit more challenging to keep some of those colors really peaking. Aquapower really, really helps across the board. But yeah, almost every single group of coral I think is underrated.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually had Favia on my list because there's a lot of common strains of it. I had a pale green one with no red, but man, when it's just healthy and kicking ass, it's just a beautiful coral, you know, especially when it starts to get that domed shape as,
Yep.
you know, it matures and grows. I mean, it's, yeah, when you have a little frag on a square, you don't really see the full potential.
Yeah.
For me, the candy cane that you and I both have from back in the day,
20 years old, the Starmint.
yeah, you know, it's cool. I mean, yes, it has a brown outer with white stripes and a green center, but I actually like it better than the neon glow in the dark green ones, right? It has
Yep.
more to it. It's not just this solid glowing color.
And that's a really cool coral. I mean, even all candy corals, honestly. Um, they're a highlight coral. They're a low light coral.
Oh
They're
yeah.
a lying on the bottom of your tank coral. You've forgotten about it in the back of your aquascape coral. Man, candy corals. I didn't have that on my list, but that's a great point. Like, you
I
also
feel
need some.
like I haven't intentionally kept that coral, but it just has been in my tank forever because
Mhm.
exactly like you described, I'll hack it back sometimes and some piece falls in the back of the tank and starts into a new colony. So it's just it's like having somebody in your house that just won't leave, you know. It's just
You want to hear something funny, man? Um, the Starmint really is special. Like, again, it's a brown candy coral with a green mouth and whitish green stripes, very well defined. A lot of people say they have it, but I've seen colonies and pieces that fit that description, but they don't hold a candle to the Starmint. I've really actually looked for comparable strains for almost 20 years, but I gave a piece to a local fish store, and it just looks so good in his tank. He is now selling them for about $75 per polyp,
good for him.
and they sell out incredibly fast. How weird is that?
Yeah,
That's
it's
like
really
a local hype thing that had nothing to do with Instagram. It has everything to do with people seeing it in his tank.
in person.
Yeah, seeing it in person. Yeah, candy corals. Just I wish they had a little bit more range,
Hmm.
but even the teal one. I recently actually picked up a teal strain with a greener mouth,
Hmm.
so I only have one little frag of that. But yeah, candy coral is the great for beginners, low light, high light, and I feel really strongly about in any aquascape, you need some supporting actors,
Hmm.
right? If everything is just burning your retinas, it just makes it really hard to focus. Makes it really hard to focus, and I think that's what the soft corals are really good for. I actually have a nice assortment of Sinularias, Nephtheas, and Sarcophytans, and I've been shuffling them around. A lot of these started off in the soft coral tank, and they've moved over to kind of my. I have a very intense, SPS of coral flat, and then I have like a normal intense one. But in the normal intense coral flat, um, I've just kind of started grouping them, and man, they just every single one of them just super fuzzy and just super healthy, and with a lot of light and a lot of flow, they don't get stringy. They get dense.
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually when you were talking, that's right where my brain went is um if you put, you know, your usual strain of, oh, these are great for low light tank soft corals, and you give them a ton of flow and you give them a ton of light, it's like a whole different animal, you know. I
Yeah,
mean, they're amazing. um
that's a great point because it kind of harkens back to the damselfish. They're treated like crap.
yeah.
They're not given good lighting. They're not given great nutrition. Same thing with the soft corals. When you treat them like a third-rate coral, they're gonna look like a third-rate coral. And you put them into ideal conditions, and they're really, really catchy.
Well, you think about their morphology, right? They have the ability to beef up. You know, so if the current's really strong, they're like, oh, this is like a reef crest type condition. They can change their morphology in a sense, like they can beef up their shape. You know, so what like take my leather corals, right? They've got like stems that are like wider than a beer can because they're
Mm-hmm.
they're having to put up with those gyres, you know,
Right.
and it's just cool to see them like that, right? Whereas when you see like leathers in like a kind of a crappy flow area. They're just they keep perforating and dropping little babies like they're trying to get the hell out of there. You know, they're like maybe my offspring can find something better. This sucks. But you put them in some good flow, and it's a whole different story. So
let's take a little detour and just a trip down memory lane and talk about the original green polyp sarcophyton.
oh, that's a Colorado native. Well, not native. It's not from Colorado, but that was one of those that was just passed around the Denver area, and yeah, that was an interesting one. I remember moving to Atlanta, and it was like that coral, the green slimer, the orange cap. Like nobody in Atlanta had it. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, this is in like everybody's tank in Denver. It's like a weed. Like, you can't get rid of it.
Yeah.
And then you came here and people were like, whoa.
Well, what's interesting is that I'm pretty sure that's where Tyree got it. That coral was here. It was grown by one of the first coral farmers ever. Do you remember his name? Is it Noel Curry?
Oh, yeah.
Scientific
Corals.
Inc. out of Atlanta.
Yeah.
And I remember like when he was still in business, I tracked down the lineage, I guess, of this coral. Came from Tonga, and then it went to Scientific Corals Inc. He had little ads in FAMAs in the late 90s. He made a small resurgence, but didn't really make an impact, I guess. And then Steve Chang got a piece, and man, this is way before green polyp leathers of various types were ever brought in from.
Oh, yeah, there's nothing like it out there.
Mostly Australia. And I actually have a green polyp leather that I collected in Australia, and I have a couple other strains. But man, and when you become a soft coral connoisseur, that green polyp leather is still the brightest, because some of the others, they have greenish polyp stalks and then like really green tentacles, or vice versa, or only green tentacles. But that original 20-plus-year-old strain of neon green polyp sarcophyton is the capitulum, the crown itself is nice doo-doo brown, but then the polyps are neon green. And I feel like there's that one iconic image from Chris Cap's tank when he was Tank of the Month, I think 2005.
Massive one.
Well, at the time it was massive, but now they're a lot bigger. But he had a lawnmower blenny just sitting in that field of neon green polyps, and this is before blue LEDs really made those colors pop even more. But yeah, that's a coral that deserves a lot of respect. It's so funny, man. Now every store in town, like, you can find small, medium, large colonies for 20, 30, $50.
There was sorry, go ahead.
You and I would just like, we were pining for one back when there was a wait list, and they were $100.
Yeah. Remember when you had to wait? Like, I'd be on the Tyree list for a coral, and you'd have to wait like a year for the month that you were gonna get the frag. But then the frag really only was like $100, and now it's like, I mean, I get inflation and all that, but now like $100 is like cheap. Not cheap, but
that's a normal nice coral.
Yeah. That's not one you wait a year to buy. That it's okay, it's your turn, But I heard a story about that coral repeatedly, and I have no way of proving the truth of it or anything. I'm sure you've heard the story too, that it was like this strain was being propagated for cancer research in the Denver area. And I don't know, I could never prove that was true, so I was always like, okay, like somebody...
I think that was confounded with some of Garf's claims that they were growing sarcophytons for research. I think back then they were mostly bioprospecting for pharmaceutical and pharmacological compounds. But now I know that is a thing.
It was
I don't know how deep they're going into it.
They were... The story was like, that's why it was so... Why it kind of bubbled up in the Colorado area. And I was like, well...
No, it was Scientific Corals, and then they got a piece of Steve Chang. But yeah, now there's a I'd like to take some credit, not all of it, for people really digging into the sarcophytans, the irregular toadstools. Everybody's trying to rediscover the weeping willow leather coral, which is funny. It's so funny to me because, I had that for so long, and then finally, I mean, I waited like 12, 13, 15 years to really like brag about it. And now everybody's got a weeping willow. I mean, we talked about that on the previous session.
Yeah.
But it's cool.
It's cool that people are excited about a coral, not because it glows in the dark,
Yes.
It's because it's got a cool growth, a cool, crazy polyp extension, and but color wise, it's it's not like this highlighter color coral. So it's nice to see that.
Yeah. Yeah, and then just when I talk about soft corals, moving on, not quite a soft coral is, you kind of started touching upon that, is regular shrooms.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it is. I don't know if even my dimmest corners of my coral tanks, I don't have many shrooms. I did get my hands on some classic purple Rhodactis, probably in December. You know what I'm talking about? The purple Tonga purple bullseye, even though it's not from Tonga. Oh my lord! But that is a coral that looks almost black under blue lighting. Back to what you were saying about the blue corals. The blue corals under blue lighting do nothing.
Yeah, but blue actinodiscus mushrooms are amazing in daylight spectrum. I've got them all over my tank, and
I need to get some from you.
I mean, they just randomly float around and start setting up shop, and I've been very fortunate that they're almost like, hey, we're going to cover any exposed rock, but they don't seem to irritate my corals much.
Save me some. I think I'm going to have to set up just a whole new tank with the old school techniques with almost no filter because, and you know what? That's crazy. Chris Cap coming in again. The last time I saw like nice patches of just classic watermelon, discosoma, reds, and then the blues, he had a tank that was just packed with them, just making like a little stairway to heaven, from the bottom of the tank to the top. And that's a daylight coral, man. That's a daylight thing, because if you're only going for the blue light, you're just not going to be able to appreciate and enjoy that coral the way it's meant to be.
Those are cool. Yeah, they're in my tank because I love them, and I going old school. I guess I remember way back in the day, J.P. Burleson, the guy that used to bring in Tunzi, and he also had these back when wet dries were cool. He had like the sweetest, but his tank, I remember, just was like a field of different shrooms. And I think he had blues in there. He had some other colors in there. But I remember just being enamored with that tank. And then in the midst of like his shroom, just his field of shrooms, he would have like little Maxima clams popping out with the electric blue mantles. And it was just a cool tank.
I think you and I are going to help bring back some of these old favorites. If you guys want to fight over a 1/2-inch, 1-inch neon orange jawbreaker shroom or a collectus that is gonna grow hyper slow, you have at it. I'll let you guys duke it out. Me, just give me that regular old, kind of orange, red, blue, and watermelon shrooms of my youth. The shrooms of my youth, the regular classic discosomas. It's it's so funny too, man, because like, every coral has had its moment of hype, right?
Yeah.
And the jawbreaker was probably the first one to kind of put the shrooms on the map, and then the bounces, and then they started finding all these other bounce varieties. I have never had a bounce. I've just really enjoyed them in other people's tanks. I currently have, I think it's a biohazard bounce that I am rehabilitating for somebody, but I can't. I would much rather have a field of regular discosomas that are colorful under daylight lighting than some of these super neon strains. And I'm very happy to have my purple bullseye shroom again. But in the last 3 to 6 months, they've been finding a lot more new varieties of Rhodactis And you can get colonies now, thankfully, for $100, $200, maybe $300 sometimes, um, that are um, kind of rusty orange, either with like a colorful rim or a
Yeah.
colorful mouth. So it's cool. It's cool to see shrooms get their moment because you never would have thought that would happen.
I've struggled with the copper colored ones. Um,
Kind of like the orangey red,
yeah, but
a
almost
little
with like a
metallic, but
metallic sheen to them.
yes,
I don't know.
yes.
I've tried multiple times. I've got a frag of one now, and I thought it would be a really cool complement, complementary color with like the blue shrooms if they, were duking it out. But it just sits there and hangs in there, and I don't know. I that goes back to your discussions about in the past that we've had about knowing where the coral comes from, and
Hmm.
for all I know, right, like daylight spectrum blasting them, maybe they come from overhanging, underhangs or something. Like maybe I'm just not giving it what it needs, and it's miserable.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I'd like to see shrooms come back the way they used to. Not all these crazy strains. I mean, don't get me wrong. Eclectuses are nice. Jawbreakers are cool. They're absolutely beautiful, but it's one. If somebody has them, they have one. They have four or five. If they have a tank full of them, it's taken them years to get to that point. I'm like, okay, give me the regular discosomas. I'll enjoy them. Um, and kind of back to some of the maligned, kind of like the maligned fish that we were talking about, or maligned inverts. Galaxia.
oh,
Galaxia is such an awesome coral. I think the only person I know who has a real soft spot for him is Julian Sprague. He's got a nice big chunks of different species and strains here and there.
but those
Um,
sweepers, man.
they that's one of those cases where it's almost like deserved. It's almost like a deserved bad rap because I have them in with my euphyllias. I have them near the overflow so the sweepers can go, kind of towards the drain.
Yeah.
But what's really funny is I have a torch spawn right next to them, and a torch spawn has its own sweepers reaching out towards the Galaxia. And so if you're not familiar, if you're not current, and it makes a lot of sense in hindsight, Galaxias are basically micro euphyllias and micro fimbriphyllis, and it makes a whole bunch of sense. And what's funny too, man? I don't have any green Galaxia. I have gold Galaxia, I have orange Galaxia, I have green mouth, yellow Galaxia, I have regular yellow Galaxia. But I keep thinking I'm just kind of like have them in a holding pattern in the back of my euphilia tank. Julian noticed that when he was visiting the studio. I was like, I see what you did there. It was really cool. I'm glad he noticed that. But like, a frag is nice. But I remember, man, one time I was working at his shop and this guy brought us a chunk that was the size of a basketball. And just watching the tentacles, like the waves of current pass over the tentacles, it's really a sight to behold. And I don't think you'd actually kill the Galaxia. Do you know the only way I've ever been able to kill the Galaxia?
Hmm.
With another Galaxia. I had two Galaxias grown on the same magnetic thing, and one overgrew the other.
There can be only one.
Yeah, it was really funny, but yeah, Galaxia is another one that I think in the future people are gonna find more strains and really start to discover and appreciate some of the nuances of that coral. Um, yeah, but God, it's just like I want to make a better case for Galaxia, but those sweepers, man, like again, it's one of those corals you get it into peak condition. Those sweepers have a very long reach, so you have to be very strategic about where you place that coral.
Yeah. Yeah, I've kept it once long ago, and I learned my lesson.
Mm, yeah,
um,
they oh man, they can burn through some corals before you realize like, oh. But if I ever find like a big used Galaxia at a fish store, there's no way I'll be able to resist. I'm thinking I'll find like a chamber or one of my coral flats up. I'll find a corner for Galaxias. They definitely deserve it. Um, would you got any other underrated corals in mind? Because I can keep going.
I've got two easy ones from the SBS realm, and But they've had their moment in the sun. But
Oh, okay.
I feel like you just can't ever go wrong with them if you're into the SPS thing. And obviously the green slimer, it grows
Yes.
like bonkers. It's beautiful. I mean, you've got color, you got growth, you got hardiness. It's a staghorn, right? Um, and then one of my all-time favorites is the orange digitata.
Oh my goodness, you're talking my language.
Yeah,
Let's start.
I
Let's
got
start with
over
the
the
slammer.
Capricornus thing. That ain't my thing anymore. But like a digitata, yeah, all day long.
All right, let's talk about the slimer a little bit.
All right.
You had a tank of the month. Was that back in 2001?
Something like that, yeah.
And you had, oh, we forgot one soft coral that's totally underrated. You had a big old colony of green slimer,
Hmm.
not 6 inches, not 10 inches, but it was like 15 inches high, and just you had it was 65K Iwasaki's. So what did you do for flow on that tank? I think you had a Iwasaki return, but I don't know. I don't remember what the hell we used in the tanks anymore.
And honestly, I just had Maxijets galore.
That's all we could do, huh?
Yeah.
That's all we
Yeah,
could
and
do.
then, but no doubt, once the Tunzi streams came out,
Yeah.
that was like an awakening for the green slimer, man. Like it was like a whole different ball game with green slimers. Because then, I mean, even a few years ago in my 225, it was just insane how you could literally, if you had like I don't know, a 24 by 24 cube, you could just put like one frag of green slimer in it, have a ton of
Hmm.
flow, and just let it turn into a giant staghorn. And you wouldn't have to wait that long either to do it.
The only problem with that coral is that in order to really appreciate it, you need some scale.
Mm-hmm.
You're not really ever going to enjoy a 6 by 6 inch slimer, acropora young guy. You really have to give it a lot of room, and I feel like that extends to, man, pretty much like all the true staghorns, right? Even like a blue tip brown, you get that coral. You remember you were visiting me at USC. You get that coral, super bright. Like the brown almost fades away to like a light pastel yellow.
Mm-hmm.
But man, now you're really talking about very bright lights and daylight spectrum to achieve that. But those blue tips, oh my lordy! I don't have any regular blue tip stag. I have some other kind of varieties that are in that same neighborhood. But one coral that's totally been forgotten is the Abrolosensis, the
Oh
super
yeah.
fuzzy. I have a couple pieces that came from the right place, Abrolhos Islands off the coast of Western Australia. Um, but they're not the old one that was like had that big like chunky eraser tip that was like blue to pink and like super shaggy tentacles. I don't think I've seen that in a really long time.
Yeah, that was another coral that looked phenomenal. Uh, well, for me at least, under like 10K, 14K lights, where it had a little bit of a blue, but you have some of that daylight in there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that was that was a staghorn. I guess I mean, I'm not really in the SPS thing anymore, but are there really a large variety of staghorns
Oh
out
yeah,
there?
oh yeah.
Yeah,
All right, so you got the green slimer.
yeah.
You got the blue tip green slimer,
Okay.
or just blue tip young eyes, neon green but with blue tips. Yesterday I just got back a piece of the Dallas, which is
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Australia's analog. It's a hobby frag from Australian reefers that was analogous to the green slimer that kind of took over their tanks. But the piece I got back was grown, I think, in a combination of T5s and LEDs. It's kind of got like little orange polyps at the base, but it's I don't know, it's a different shade of green, and it's got like some kind of dark notes on the flesh itself. Just super duper cool. Yeah, and there's a wide range of different staghorns. The Steve Elias stag would be a really good
Oh, that
one.
was a good one. Yeah, I forgot
Yeah,
about that guy.
I need to get some of that back. That's all I'm interested in collecting nowadays. I mean, there's a few like oddball species, but I don't care about your funky named coral, as we said in the previous session. I care about the corals that I used to have and the corals that I've seen in the wild.
What about the do people still have love for the Garf bonsai?
Yes. Yes,
Good.
that is one of those corals that has really had the most staying power because it grows quickly, bright purple, green polyps. I had have a piece, but that was the only one that it got some kind of bugs on it, so I like clipped it off, threw it away, but there was a little bit that had encrusted on the rock. Now that's growing back and looking like it should.
Nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Oh, but going back to one coral that we forgot was the Fiji yellow leather.
I've got that one.
Yeah, is yours super yellow?
No, it's not like the ones we saw back in the day. And I don't know if it's is it a collection thing, like where we used to get them versus where, what we're getting today? Is it a change in lighting? Because I mean, even
Lighting.
you think it's
Lighting.
lighting?
Yeah. I got a piece from Eye Catching Corals. I even did a story on it, just kind of celebrating getting a piece back. It literally took like a year and a half to go from bright yellow to brown.
Hmm.
And I have since, I'm currently in the process of like getting it into more and more and more light. And it could be a blue thing, it could be a blue light thing. So right now I have it in my highlight but bluish tank. And once it kind of settles into that, I'll move into my higher light, higher flow, and wider spectrum tank because oh man, that canary yellow just cannot be beat, man. And it's I would like it'll live. Like I actually have little bits here and there that there's nothing to point out. Nothing to point out. But this one colony that I'm really looking after, I'm gonna get it back. I'm gonna get back into that, that just yellow tang, yellow coloration.
There was a guy here in Atlanta, Richard.
Yeah,
He had it under. He had it at the very. I mean, he had a wall of rock, right? But
very
he had it in
top,
the top of the tank under
two
Iwasaki's.
400 waters.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Iwasaki's, and man, it was like banana yellow. I mean, it was just
Can
crazy.
can we have a moment of silence for Iwasaki's? They've been discontinued, bro.
That's sad. I threw out my remaining ones I had a few years ago just because I knew I'd never set up a halide probably again.
It's irresponsible now. It's
Yeah.
irresponsible to use that much power. I hate to say it. I mean, maybe like I always dreamed of like kind of rebuilding my old like my first reef tank, a 75 gallon with 4 VHOs and just kind of the same fish and corals, but using 440 watts on a 75-gallon tank for just the lighting just doesn't seem like it just doesn't seem right anymore.
I thought
God, we used
about
to
that
throw
once
so
too.
much power at their tanks back in the day. So much power.
Like how people are into classic cars, like get into like
Mm-hmm.
classic reef keeping, like set up a tank, pull out my inland aquatics dump bucket turf scrubber, and throw some
Mm-hmm.
halides on top and see what happens. But no, I don't have the space for that, I guess. But
It's kind of funny that in the early days, I think you and I had more of an eye for these corals. Like I could pronounce Echinophilia before they were dubbed chalice corals. Like I was looking for them. I'd find big chunks that were just kind of off mauve colored and they would turn bright pink in my tanks. And now, the diversity has exploded. But I think it's crazy like how every coral has had its moment. So
yeah,
almost every coral, right? Like people are collecting encrusting lithophyllons or specialty strains of Leptoceras. I was grabbing that orangish flower anemone from the $8 bins that would turn neon orange in my tanks way before they had a moment. And now, the shrooms. So like a lot of these corals, like they've really had their moment. I feel like Euphilia is almost like a perpetual moment. With the orange hammers and every variety of torch coral, and I'm sure down the road, like just there's going to be even more to play with. But one group that still has not had its full moment would be, I think, Gorgonians.
it's getting there though. I saw now what is these glitter something gorgonians.
No, you're thinking glitter goniopora.
What are you saying?
Gorgonian.
Oh, I misheard you. Gorgonians.
Gorgonian.
Yeah.
Well, let's touch on gonioporas. I have, I don't know, maybe like 15 or 20 different colonies of goniopora. At least half of them I bought as frags, totally expecting them to die. I have no idea what actually changed over the last 10 years that all of a sudden now I'm like looking at them like, hey, you're too big. I need to frag you out. But that being said, dude, I have 4 different red gonnies with yellow tentacles. 2 of them look amazing. One of them looks amazing when the lights are blue, and the other one is just kind of meh. And so that's one group. Like even they're growing and their polyps are out and they're just super fleshy. But I prefer the ones with just more polyps in action.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't like the I had a red one
You
for
had
a
red one
long
for a
time.
long time. I
Yeah.
remember.
And it even popped off a little baby. But then unfortunately, clownfish, I stopped keeping an anemone in the tank, and
Hmm.
they were like, "This will do." And so then I moved it down to my refugium for a while, and it did all right there. But yeah, I don't know. Eventually, it wasted away. But I think that was because of my neglect, because the thing
Hmm.
was pretty indestructible in my tank. But
It's so funny how the first Ghani we could actually reliably keep was the red Ghani. It was
yeah,
just regular red flower pot
there
coral.
used to be
And
like
then,
this thing about stay away from the green ones. The red ones are okay, right?
well, it's deeper than that. At the time, I think the green ones were mostly Goniopora stokesi. It's like that
Mm-hmm.
regular, baseball-sized piece that I don't know if people are actually keeping that species. And then the red is, kind of another species. But it's actually quite remarkable when we have frag shows that now that like a lot of coral vendors will have a section of frags. It's hard to know how many of those are actually grown out versus just kind of chopped up.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, flower pots, never thought that they would have their moment in the spotlight. But I think gorgonians, man, like if you put a gorgonia in a typical reef, it's just, it's going to look all right. But I think you need that real wave action to really appreciate. And one coral that I really want to get in my collection is just a regular old large polyp Unicia. It's got those big fleshy brown polyps with like pinnules on the tentacles that just makes it look like a little creature. Super common. But I think I'm gonna wait and work on putting together a wavy tank. Something with like a real oscillating current.
I had a pretty good collection going for a little while, but then I gave a bunch away because gorgonians can be a pain in the sense that when you're trying to get flow everywhere,
Yeah.
they will essentially grow up and just be right into that flow and cut everybody else out of the picture.
Yeah.
So you really need almost like a dedicated tank, which I would do very flat, low profile rock work, right? Let the
Yes.
gorgonians fill in the
Almost no
space.
rock work. Just
Yeah.
only enough rock to attach them to.
Yep. And then, space them around adequately so you can get some flow in there. I think like what Julian did is a good approach with them where you're getting a wave action because you're moving the whole body of water versus like
Yep.
trying to shoot a nozzle of current through. But yeah, I had grooves. I had, your regular purple. You're gonna school me on the Latin names, but
Sea fan?
no, just your typical like purple sea whip, I guess is what you would call it from a
Sea whip.
common.
Yeah, they don't have. They need a little bit of marketing
Yeah,
strategy behind them because they're called a sea whip, slit pour, sea rod.
yeah.
There's a lot more room there.
I got the
But
big meaty brown guy with the big polyps you were talking about. That one I still have. But yeah,
and they're not easy to propagate,
no.
right? You got to cut them, and then you got to sheath. You have to unsheath like some of the
Oh,
tissue
yeah.
off the internal skeleton or that that chitinous skeleton. Then you got to put that in a hole and secure it. It's not easy. And so there's not that many crazy colors to the sea fans, but I think the most underrated corals now are all the old school corals. Right now I've got that mangrove tank that has the 2 Kessel A500Xs, and I've got a wide variety of corals in there because I really wanted to demonstrate that I can grow some acros 3 feet away from these lights and trees at the top at the same time. But after I do that review video, I'm going to clear out virtually everything in there except for the mangroves and pretty much do purple cap and the Langside purple rim. I actually picked up it's almost like karma, right? So right around the time I was setting up the studio, I gave a really beautiful colony of purple rim langside cap to a friend of mine, Luis Rosa. You might have known him from the scene
Yeah,
back in the day.
I've been to his house.
Yep. Oh man,
He's out of the hobby, I think, right?
no. He's back in it. So I gave it to him just like 2 years ago. He's just like he just keeps to himself, does his own thing. So what's funny is that this was not a trade.
Yeah.
I gave him a beautiful, like looked almost exactly like the picture on the bottle of the ecosystems. Reef solution, that jug looked almost exactly like that. I gave him that, and then he gave me like a jumbo colony of Monoporus setosa, which I still have, and it's even bigger now. But yesterday, I was over at my good buddy's house, Evan Montgomery, and we did some bushwhacking, and we hacked out a bunch of Milka purple stylo, some orange cap, some Monopora hispida. That's a light brown with bright green polyps. ORA's had it available for a really long time. And then just like a beautiful picturesque colony of scrolling purple rim cap that I gave him about a year and a half to 2 years ago. So I'm going to clear out the mangrove tank, and I'm just going to grow a giant colony of orange cap and langside purple rim.
Nice. Reminds me of the is it the Omaha Zoo? They've got that shallow reef lagoon with the mangroves, and I think they have some pretty intense cap growth in that tank as well. But it's a good message, right? If you're getting discouraged by the crazy prices and the Instagram pictures, and you want to set up a nice tank, just go look at the greatest hits, right? It's kind of like music, right? Like there's good music in the 70s and 80s, right? Just go
And
check that stuff out.
We're not. The only thing is, the only difference is like species are forever
Yeah.
until we extinctify them, but it's maybe a scale and a presentation problem. You
Yeah.
know. Let's get back to the digis. We
Yeah.
didn't touch upon the digis. Another thing I hacked out of his tank was like a big chunk of, I call it kind of the peach orange digi.
Yeah.
You call it the pink.
I just refer to it as orange digitata, but I've seen it like be pinkish. I've seen it be.
It's usually just overlit when it's kind of pink.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one coral. Like you can't give it too much light, as
No.
long as you acclimate it, and it'll just be so freaking bright. So yeah, I've been collecting some purple digitata, the peach orange digitata, and it's about that presentation. If you have blue lights, purple digi is not for you. But if you can, have at least a period of bright daylight spectrum lighting during your tank, so you don't have to totally give it up, right? That's the thing with the older lights. You had to either choose blue or choose white. And now with the multicolor LEDs, you can have both. Right, so all my tanks are basically, daylight spectrum for a good chunk in the middle of the day, with really deep blue sections at the beginning and the end of the photo period. But yeah, purple digitata, peach digitata, and this is kind of cool. I think it's a red digitata infected with green fluorescent protein that people call grafted, and I think some of the frags of the purple digita that I got, I think from Boom Corals. I was just checking them out last night, and I saw a little bit of green in them.
Nice.
But yeah, those two corals, just a regular, perfectly presented peach digitata and the purple digitata, all-time favorites.
Don't get me wrong. I think a forest fire digi is beautiful too when it's fully grown out.
How much you want? I have so much of it. I have so much of it that it grows out and just kind of self-frags. You know what to do with the frags?
What?
I take
Calcium
them and
reactor media?
No, even better. I throw them back in the colony.
Oh, nice.
Because it can grow really lanky, but I just kind of throw them back in, so it just gets denser and denser. And,
Well, sorry, go ahead.
no, yeah, occasional visitors. Hey, you got any pieces of that? I'm like, how much you want? How much you want?
Well,
Yeah,
I like if you really get it growing good, it's like reminds me of like stalagmites. Is that what they're called in the caves? They're just
Stalactites fall,
Stalactites.
stalagmites rise.
Oh, maybe I had it right then because they grow up, right? But
Yeah, stalagmites.
yeah, it's just a cool growth. It's a cool color. You can get them in a variety of colors. And to me, it's funny, like when I talked about my acro getting pissed off because my alkalinity dropped to 4, Montiperas for me are like the perfect, it's like you're like a test kit in your tank, because Montiperas in my experience, I've never had good luck with them at high alkalinity.
Mm.
They really seem to thrive at like 7. And once I get up into the 9s and 10s, and this also seems to directly correlate with, I think, your carbon load, I think, is it? Or your basically, like if you've got like a sand bed or something, like you've got a lot of bacteria that are consuming some of the carbonates, then you can sort of get away with a higher level. But anyway, point being, in my tank, when my orange digi gets pissed off, usually it's that my alkalinity is starting to creep up too high, and then I bring it back down and it's happy. It's weird.
That's so funny you should mention that, because for me, I've almost always used Monteporos as a proxy for magnesium levels.
Mm.
For sure. Like anytime somebody tells me or asks me a question about, how to make their Montes better, I'm like, bump your magnesium. It's probably low, and I've always kind of noticed that, and I now have a tank with a substantial population of Monteporos, or as you say it very so eloquently, Montiporos. That's the scientific pronunciation for those of you that are uninitiated. Usually from a magnesium drop, but yeah, I mean, there's a huge range of SBS corals. I mean, even stylos. I mean, just regular green stylos, pink stylos, Milka stylophora. Those are bulletproof corals, to grow right alongside your purple digis and your peach digis. But yeah, I think that there's been
Pink
a little bit too
stylo
much.
under daylight spectrum. Yeah.
I actually, very recently, I kind of went through a stretch where I try to collect every strain I could get my hands on. I think I have 9 different strains. I got pink, Milka, green, super green, pink with green, and like kind of the ocean. That's what they used to call it, the ocean polyp one. So I've got 2 kind of rainbowy ones, and then a couple more. So yeah, like Posloporids, so bird's nest stylos, Posloporos. Man, just super cool corals. And then, I mean, I know people are always trying to get like the best of everything. That's kind of, I guess, normal. But like your entry level orange Cycloceras disc corals, I mean, yeah, okay, you can get like the one that has like a little bit of green streaks through it, or a little bit on the lemon yellow side. But at the end of the day, like, you're not really gonna notice that difference so much unless you have them together.
Yeah.
Just orange Cycloceras should be revered. Just such a cool coral. Even neon green. I guess we could go on and on, but I don't think I missed any major groups. Do you? I'm like literally looking over through the tanks of what's underrated, and it's kind of fun that like even Pectinias have had their moment, and all the deep water acros have had their moment.
What about
and
orange herpolitha? Have you seen that ever?
orange tongue coral? Again, those are, because they're not. There's another thing, right, with the hype, is if you can't like immediately turn around and frag it and have a decent looking frag to sell, that's one of the things that contributes or takes away from the esteem of certain coral groups. But yeah, orange tongue coral, super cool. The live Aquaria's got a orange Sandalolitha that just happens to have like little red tips to the tentacles. I know, not trying to bring Julian up here all the time, but he has like the greatest collection of underrated corals of all time. I mean, branching Leptoceras. He's got 2 different orange tongue corals. But yeah, I mean, every coral, man, every single coral. Here's the thing. Here's kind of one of my closing arguments. The funnest part of, especially the corals, right? Like the fish, you know what you're going to get. A blue tang is going to be a blue tang. A royal grandma is going to become a royal grandma. But almost every coral in average condition at the local fish store, it's almost like a personal challenge to dial in its perfect condition, whether that's placement or nutrients or lighting. And when you see it finally blossom, whether it takes like a month or 2 years, that is so freaking rewarding. Especially if you got that coral for like $10.
Well, and there's, to me, some of the beauty is the longevity of it, where when you see a tank where the corals are big and grown in, and the guy had to remove corals to let the other corals keep growing, there's something really majestic and cool about it. And whenever I see a tank that's like 20 years old, and so it's full of the greatest hits, right? It's not
Greatest
full of
hits. I
like
like
the
how you say
newest.
that.
I think if there's any coral vendors listening, somebody needs to like go ahead and sell your $1,000 mushroom, and frags over here, but you should create like a section called like greatest hits and just put like some of these corals that are more common, more affordable there. Anyway, I digress. But when you see, like they bought a lot of those corals a long time ago, so they don't have the latest, hottest, coolest thing. But these corals are mature, they're grown in. He's hacking crap back all the time. And there's something so majestic about that. Like I could stare at a tank like that all day long versus like, again, I mean, I know we harp on this a lot, but frags of LE corals are cool, but I mean, I guess we got to wait a while to see what, see who's going to grow that thing out for 10 years and make it look gorgeous. Or are you going to lose interest in it because you're going to move on to the next shiny new thing, right?
Yeah.
Like corals require patience, I think. Like if you buy a coral, I mean, you take like the Favia you brought up, right? Like it's going to take 5 years for that thing to be 12 inches big and round and looking
but
amazing.
Enjoy it along the way.
Yeah.
Even when it's 2 to 5 inches, it's going to be neon green with bright red polyps.
Right.
Bright red mouths. But I think there's definitely, I think a lack of daylight spectrum that is affecting the rating of a lot of these corals as well as scale, because a green slimer is very colorful, but you're not going to appreciate it until you can almost put your hands around it.
And don't get me wrong, those crazy highlighter corals will probably look amazing when they're grown out, but there's not a lot of examples of that, right? I mean, yet, but
yeah. That is the beauty of a lot of these underrated corals. That just makes it so much easier and affordable for me to pick them up for a song and a dance. Dude, everywhere I go, every time I'm putting on some of these underrated corals, they'll give them to me, or they'll, like $10-20 just to get them out of the way, right? People want to talk about, I want to do a total different episode on the price versus value of corals, so I don't want to get into it too much, but yeah, there's a lot of underrated fish, corals, and inverts that are very affordable in the reef aquarium hobby, and there's, literally thousands of species and strains to pick from, and I hope we've kind of jostled people's radar.
I hope people that are maybe just getting into it, they may not be able to identify every coral or relate every name of coral that we've talked about like to a picture in their head, but I look at some of these hobbyists that are new to the game, getting into it and jumping on and seeing some of these coral prices or seeing like some of these trends, and I hope some of them kind of take home that message of like, get some common corals that have been around the block or like were revered back in the day that are, everybody's using them for calcium reactor media or something now. And just put them in your tank and just grow the shit out of them, right? Like just make your tank stable and happy and amazing. Put a freaking Royal Grandma in there and some cool underappreciated fish, and then just let the thing grow and take care of it. I'm telling you, like, at the 1 year, 2 year mark, like you said, you'll enjoy the journey, right? It's not about the destination, but you'll get to a point like 5 years in where you're still looking at that thing and it's just this awesome thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
It will outlast your girlfriends. Before I got married, I described certain corals as like 3 girlfriends ago, 5 girlfriends ago.
I always joke with my daughter who's 10. I point at corals in my tank. I'm like, that coral's older than that, or that coral's been with me longer than you.
All right, I think we're going to have to put a pin in it now. I think we really kind of covered the topic of underrated marine life in the aquarium hobby. I really wanted to thank everybody for tuning in. If you are watching this on YouTube and you have any specific topics that you want us to cover, now's a good time to alert us to those. And I'm a little bit new to this podcasting thing, but I listened to it enough, so I'm pretty sure you'll help us out by rating us in your favorite podcatcher. And anything else you want to say, Mark?
No, I'm stoked that we've got that podcast format for Spotify and hopefully soon iTunes. I know that's how I digest a lot of material because I'm always just busy.
Yeah.
Running around, chasing my kids or running. So it's kind of nice, or driving to work. You can put it on the background and listen to us harp about stuff. And so I think that's cool. And I did read a lot of comments of people wanting that. So that's great. And
we took a nice hard left turn into the livestock end of things. And we're going to keep it balanced, right? On a very long timeline. We're going to kind of cover a little bit of everything. But Mark, this one's for you. I want you to think of a couple topics that you want to spearhead in the future in this weekly sessions of the Reef Therapy program.
Okay, I accept your challenge.
Thank you so much for participating in this with me, and we'll do it up again next week.
See you guys.
All right, later, dudes.